Well, good morning, everyone. I am Reverend Jermaine Alberti, the Executive Director of Pathways to Promise, and I'm so happy you've joined us today for our Engage, Learn, and Network Leadership Forum. Those three words are very important. We hope you engage this process, that you learn from our guest speaker today, but we also want to set aside some time for you to network toward the very end. So we'll have about 30 minutes of presentation and Q&A, and then dedicate the last part of our time together for you to network and share with us what you are doing with your mental health ministries and the work that you are doing in your organization or as an individual. We have with us today, we're so honored to have Dr. John Petit with us today. Dr. Petit earned his medical degree from Columbia, and after completing a medical internship at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Dr. John trained in psychiatry at the Massachusetts Mental Health Center. Dr. John's major areas of interest are in psychosocial oncology, addiction, and the clinical interface between spirituality, religion, and psychiatry. Dr. John served as the editor of a book that's soon to be released in October, and he's going to share with us some tidbits from that book. Now, you got that in the announcement. The topic today is Christianity in Western Psychiatry. So that I don't spend any more time in an introduction, Dr. John, the floor is yours. So welcome to Pathways to Promise.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Maybe I can try to share my screen here. So several years ago, I had a chance to meet Craig Rennebaum at the APA's Mental Health and Faith Community Partnership, and I was very impressed with what he was able to tell me about Pathways to Promise. So it's really an honor for me to be with you all today. What I'd like to do is say a little bit about a case that I saw last week, a longstanding patient of mine, and then get into the details of the book. This is a 60-year-old woman with a history of chronic pain, substance abuse, and depression. She told me that she was having worsening suicidal thoughts after her pastor had reprimanded her for not having more faith, really sort of invalidating her depression. Felt like she couldn't keep going there to the church that she'd been a part of. She's someone that in the past had benefited from AA, but she'd looked for a more Christian-oriented 12-step program and found Celebrate Recovery. So you can see she's an example of somebody who's had some distress related to the way her faith was handled, and also benefited from having some better understanding of it incorporated with her treatment. And one of the aims of this book is to help clinicians better understand the particular challenges and resources involved when treating Christians like her, but like others as well. Also to help Christian individuals and family members integrate their faith with their understanding of mental disorders and treatment. To describe some models of collaboration between clinicians and faith communities, and provide a kind of scholarly, conceptual, and practical resource for future work. So this is, I was the lead editor, but a co-editor of this book that's just now come out online and will be in paperback next month. Steve Moffick is a Jewish psychiatrist from the Milwaukee area. Ahmed Hanker is a Muslim psychiatrist in the UK. And Howard Koenig is a researcher and psychiatrist at Duke, who we recruited for this book. The other three of us had collaborated on a couple of other books before, which I'll mention in a few minutes. So it has 21 chapters, 303 pages. As I mentioned, you can go online and read the abstracts to each chapter, and it's going to be in paperback soon. I know it costs too much money, but We don't have any control over that. The contributors include Protestant, Catholic, Anglican, Coptic, Jewish, and Muslim authors. And they include psychiatrists, psychologists, clergy, a theologian, and a philosopher. A lot of the chapters include some kind of review of the literature, a discussion of theory, and then also some case examples, because we really wanted this to be practical as well. But there's some chapters that are more theoretical or historical in nature. This is the third in a series by Springer Nature. The first one was Islamophobia and Psychiatry. The second was Anti-Semitism and Psychiatry. And this one is devoted not just to some major problem like the other two, but to sort of the broad interface between Christianity and psychiatry. So here's the table of contents, but I think what I'll do at this point is switch over to the online version, which is looks better than my PowerPoint, and we can sort of go through the chapters one at a time a little bit, and then see what kind of questions you might have.
Dr. Pete, did you open the floor for questions?
Yeah, feel free to have any to ask any questions while I'm looking to figure out how to do this correctly here.
Also, feel free to use the chat feature if you have a question. We're happy to read that out loud to the larger group. So if you want to chat with us, feel free to do that also.
Let's see here. Sorry, I'm an amateur at this thing here. Okay, here we are. Can folks see that?
We can.
Sure can.
Okay. So you can read, if you want, online the foreword and the introduction. I'm not going to get into those, but I'll just go through briefly to say what some of these chapters are about, and then you'll maybe have some questions. The first one is by Sam Thielman, who's a psychiatrist in North Carolina. He has a history degree as well. He describes the historical relationship between psychiatry and Christianity, and I think critiques pretty well the sort of narrative that we often hear that Christians just saw mental illness as demonic possession throughout the centuries. He has a description of how many of them had a more sophisticated understanding of that, and also treatment that included spiritual and physical and psychological interventions. The next one is by Jennifer Harris. She's a psychiatrist that works with me here in Boston, about mental illness stigma in Christian communities. She talks about the factors that contribute to stigma in general, the ones that are specific to Christian communities sometimes, and then ways of addressing stigma, having to do with thinking about it from a Christian point of view, and having more contact with the mentally ill as another way. Christopher Cook is a psychiatrist in the UK and also an Anglican priest who's written a lot about hearing voices, and discusses in this chapter the relationship between psychotic symptoms and hearing from God, and how those are handled differently in different Christian communities. Jennifer has another chapter here on mood disorders where she talks about depression and the way Christians can handle that well or not, as in the case of my patient, and what some of the ways are to maybe think differently about that within the church. The chapter on children and families is written by 3 child psychiatrists in the Midwest, and they talk about what some of the values are that Christians often have in raising their kids, and what some of the issues can be, especially in adolescence when kids tend to break with some of those and rebel. Nadine Nias is a Canadian psychiatrist who has seen a lot of people with, a lot of Christians with trauma histories. And she writes in this chapter about ways to attend to the autonomic nervous system, regulate your emotions before you try to work through the content of the trauma, and her experience learning about that herself. And she gives some of the history of and the science of it too. This next chapter is by a psychologist in Alabama and a couple of his colleagues there on moral injury, the kind of distress that people, including Christians, often feel when they feel like they've violated one of their moral standards and have trouble recovering from that. We hear a lot more of that now, along with PTSD and people coming back from serving overseas, but not just in military populations. Len Sperry in this chapter talks about moral injury in Christian organizations. He uses the term sacred moral injury because he's arguing that when people are abused within the context of a church, say the Catholic sex abuse scandal, it has repercussions on people's faith as well as on their psyche, and there needs to be an institutional response that's helpful to that. And he outlines some of the things that he thinks are important in dealing with that problem, not just at an individual level. John Swinton is a theologian and former psychiatric nurse in the UK who writes about Christianity and disability here, arguing that our culture's notions of disability are often at odds with how, as Christians, we need to think about disability. And he uses an example as well. So he's written a good bit in this area in other places. In this chapter, Miracles in Care at the End of Life, Gloria White Hammond, who is a pediatrician and an African-American pastor who has taught some with me here, talks about the challenges in working with people near the end of life who believe in miracles, and how to work with them in a sort of medical and also a pastoral way to come to terms with what they may need to come to terms with, and her experience being able to do that in a palliative care kind of setting. The next chapter on addiction and 12-step spirituality is by a couple of addiction psychiatrists that I work with here, who talk about the Christian origins of 12-step spirituality, how it may or may not fit someone's search for sobriety, and Celebrate Recovery, which is an alternative, more Christian-oriented 12-step program developed in California and now across the country, as many of you probably know. Gerrit Klaas is a psychiatrist and a philosopher in the Netherlands who looks at this history of people talking about different models of integrating Christianity and psychology and psychiatry, from the biblical counseling on the one end to a much more sort of integrated model on the other. And it's a fairly theoretical chapter. He has some helpful suggestions about how to think about it there. In this chapter by Harold Koenig and Michelle Pierce, who's a psychologist, they review the literature on Christian integrated cognitive behavioral therapy and describe what Michelle's program has been for doing Christian CBT. She has a book about it as well. In the next chapter, there are 3 models of delivering Christian-oriented or integrated psychiatric care that the authors talk about. Tom Okamoto talks about some of the inpatient programs that existed in Southern California. Mina Murham talks about how in his Coptic congregation in New York, the priest, who was also a psychiatrist, began offering mental health care within their church context. And Alan Fung and Karen Wang talked about how at Tyndale University in Toronto, there was a Christian-oriented mental health program for the students in the seminary. And sort of compare and contrast what the issues are in different kinds of delivering that kind of care. Nancy Kehoe, who's a Catholic nun and a psychologist, and Mary Lindell, who's an Episcopal priest and a psychiatrist, reviewed the literature on clergy-clinician collaboration and talked about a couple of models that they've been familiar with. Then in this next chapter, Alan Fung, Mina, and Tom again talked about ways to educate others, especially clergy and the lay public, about mental health and what they've found useful in their experience. Victor Shepard is a pastor at Tyndale who's helped them over the years to educate seminarians. This chapter is by a psychologist in the UK who is also bipolar and talks about his experience being informed by his faith as he became the president of the UK's Psychological Association. And it's a more personal chapter. The next one is by a Jewish psychiatrist in New York, Sharon Packer, who's treated a number of Christian patients and describes how having come from a place of faith herself, she's been able to understand and relate to them in helpful ways, even though she's not a Christian herself. Steve Moffat talks about his experience over his career as a Jewish psychiatrist interfacing with Christians in positive and not so positive ways. And Amin Honker does a similar thing, talking about his experience in Lebanon and then in the UK and then in treating Christian patients as a Muslim psychiatrist. And the last chapter is just something about my personal story and trying to navigate this interface as a resident, as a family member, as someone who's been in practice for a long time and getting referred patients who are looking for somebody who is maybe able to share their faith. So I think I'm going to stop there and just see what kind of questions folks might have.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for putting together such a wonderful resource that is so full of information. And so I'm really excited about being able to share this as a resource as part of Pathways to Promise. I was listening to every chapter. I was like, oh my goodness, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. So it's a treasure trove full of good information. So we would invite you to please most definitely share questions via chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question directly to Dr. John. So who wants to start us off? Cody?
Yeah, I'll start off. I'm excited. So my question is, and this could be a question that maybe many of us have thought about involving our loved ones. I am part of what I do. I'm a mental health first aid instructor as well, which I really enjoy. I love it. I use it all the time. I'm so grateful for it. However, there are times, especially with particular loved ones that we love, relatives, whether friends or whatnot, you may be able to see that, because that one of your chapters talked about trauma. And as a loved one or someone who cares, how can one continue to be supportive if you know that your loved one has experienced a lot of trauma, however, they're not at that place yet to process it? How can I be that compassionate? Because sometimes it's been a journey. It's been a journey for me. I know, Dr. Germain knows my journey, but trying not to, because everybody's process, everybody's journey is different and it takes time. So being able to help your loved one through that process, even though they may not be at the point or they're there, but it's like, it's scary to actually have to go back and actually process what has happened. So I guess as a support, how could I be someone who can, continue to not be enmeshed, but then come alongside them? And we talk about that a lot in Pathways too, being a companion. So
Yeah, that's a great question. There is this whole literature now on trauma-informed care. I work in a general hospital, so we see patients in the emergency room and on the medical wards, and our team tries to help the rest of the medical team be thoughtful about how they approach people who might have a trauma history, so they're not triggered. And we try to ask them, if they have a trauma history, but make it clear they don't have to give us any of the details if they don't want to. And then if it seems like the history is getting in their way, we try to encourage them to see somebody to talk about it in a place that's safe for them, and try to listen for what the obstacles to that might be. Have they had a bad experience with a provider before? Are they afraid someone's not going to respect their faith? Or, try to address whatever the obstacle is, even though we might not be the ones to do the work ourselves. And sometimes traumatized patients need to have somebody physically go with them to an office so they feel safe there for the first time. Or you've all probably had those kind of experiences. And if you can find somebody who you trust that's going to be gentle and helpful to them, then you can try to maybe accompany them yourself, even physically.
thank you. I appreciate that.
I wanted to ask it. First of all, I have to agree with Jermaine. It looks like I wish I had $119, but I'll figure out how to get access to this.
Get your library to buy it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get the library to buy it for sure. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and as I'm sure you know, we have become the place where many who are harmed by their faith of birth, in particular those in the LGBTQ community, come and and are able to be themselves. And I don't see this specifically addressed, and yet I feel pretty strongly that Christianity has done a great deal of harm. Not all, I mean, all religions have done a great deal of harm here. And unfortunately, psychiatry has done a great deal of harm here. And so is this addressed anywhere in a particular chapter, but just didn't make it into the title? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's in my chapter, I mention it as an issue that's been an obstacle. And in Sharon Packer's chapter, one of her cases is of a gay man in New York City who was very committed to his faith, but rejected by his faith community. And she tells his story very well. So it is there, and it is an important issue, but we didn't have a whole chapter on it.
Hi, I'm Robert Scrocky, and Jermaine's going to do a 2-hour presentation in a few weeks on the Bridges to Care program that's been operating in San Antonio and St. Louis that trains cohorts of congregations to be behavioral health competent. And there's a mix of trainings: mental health first aid, trauma-informed perspectives, what are the local mental health resources that are faith-friendly, that kind of thing. And I was just thinking, from the perspective of trying to train lay members of congregations to be good ambassadors of support for people who are facing mental health challenges within the context of their faith tradition, I wondered if you had any thoughts or recommendations about training lay people in particular to be good supportive ambassadors in this whole movement.
Yeah, I mean, you all could probably write the book about that. The chapter we have on educating in this area is written more, I think, for psychiatrists who are addressing audiences that would include lay people, but they don't specifically talk about their issues. I think their experience has often been with clergy and people who have some seminary background. They don't address that issue specifically, and so maybe you all should write something yourselves about it. Get it out there in the literature.
Thank you.
Rosemary Graham has her hand up. Rosemary, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, you're invited to do so.
Yes, I can't be seen this morning, but I hope you guys can hear me.
We
Yes.
can.
Okay, in answer to your question, I just finished taking certified mental health coach training from Light University, and it's also connected with the American Association of Christian Counselors. It's a 40-hour training. It's all online, and what it trains church members to become what's called first responders. We don't necessarily do counseling, but we are coaches. But we are, what my responsibility would be, when I'm talking with people, if I see that they need help, I would in advance with a committee find resources and information available for them to go to. For instance, if I have a client and you are, I've talked with you earlier, and you are my referral, I can call you and say, listen, I have a client, they're having some issues outside of my scope. They need some additional help with depression. It looks like they have depression, major depressive disorder, and when can you fit them into your schedule? I think it's an absolutely wonderful program that we have. That it's also gone. You can also find it on Mental Health Gateway, because that's how I found it, through them. And actually, the tuition was free. I just had to pay a processing fee and the membership fee. And it is a wealth of information in terms of mental health. It gets very, very detailed. I'm now certified, and now I'm going through a grief and loss training. So there are programs out there that not necessarily will put us in the counseling work, but will definitely help us to be what they call first responders. And I think it's much, much needed. I am planning right now with my church to start a small support group, and I'll be using the materials from Mental Health Grace Alliance. They have several curriculums that you can also do on mental health with your churches. So, starting a mental health ministry and getting the word out there is very, very helpful. Oh, and by the way, I am the Disabilities Ministries Director for Seventh-day Adventists, Regional Director in Atlanta, Georgia, and also the Southeast District of Volunteer. I've done mental health first aid, and I've also done the Depression and Anxiety Recovery Program with the Netley Health Solutions. So I'm very involved in getting our pastors and our leaders on board with mental health.
Rosemary, thank you so much for sharing with us.
And let me also say this very quickly. I have Pathways to Promise to thank, because I'm a former member of the National Council of Churches Disability Committee. And back in 2003, someone from Pathways to Promise came and did a presentation on clergy and mental health, gave us tons of materials, and told us to take it home and give it to our leaders. Well, I got home and I started procrastinating. I'll send it. But I woke up one Sunday morning, a young lady here in the metro area had killed her pastor, her mother, and herself inside church sanctuary one Sunday morning. She had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, And she's been a member of the church for over 20 years, usher, choir member, and everything. So that's what started me on my zeal and passion for mental health. So I do have Pathways of Promise to thank for that. And we have using materials throughout the years.
Rosemary, thank you so much. I know our board president, Mark Stevenson, knows you also. And
Yes,
I
yes.
just sent you a message to please reach out to me via email so we can chat more. I did put in the chat via link to that training that Rosemary mentioned at University. And we are familiar with that at Pathways and are also using that as a resource for our group there in San Antonio, who we've trained over 200 congregation members in San Antonio.
Oh, wow.
And the Bridges to Care model that Robert is talking about, that I was the steering chair of in St. Louis when we started the program in St. Louis. So
Oh, wow.
I want to encourage you all to reach out to Pathways for more resources. Dr. Petit, I want to most definitely give persons another at least 5 minutes to ask you more questions if they have any. So the floor is open. You have any more questions for Dr. John? By the way, Cody started calling you Dr. John. I just stole it, and that's what. So I hope that's okay with you.
That's good. Thanks.
Awesome.
Janet, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I've already asked one, but if no one else has one, I'm very curious about your reference to the recovery model being more Christian-based, or there was something you said about that, and I just wanted you to say more about that.
Oh yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. Celebrate Recovery is a 12-step program that was developed by Rick Warren and his wife at their church, Saddleback Church in California, which is used in a lot of churches around the country now. Typically, there'll be one evening where they'll have some kind of worship experience and maybe a teaching, and then break up into smaller groups for people with different issues, sexual issues, addiction issues, relationship issues. And then they go through a sort of Christianized 12-step process of working through those issues in those small groups. So it's not the recovery movement generally with a small r, it's Celebrate Recovery with a
Capital, okay.
capital C, capital R, yeah.
Okay, I guess I always thought of AA as pretty Christian anyway, but I guess that's a misconception on my part. It is very spiritually based, but not necessarily Christian based.
Well, its origins were Christian, in the Oxford movement, but it got it was made more generic, with the higher power language, and
okay.
There's some people, who find it too Christian still, and other people who don't find it Christian enough. So
okay, so the Celebrate Recovery sort of grew out of that group.
Yeah,
so, okay,
yeah, right.
It very specific. Okay, good to know. Good to know as a resource. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. John?
Can we,
I'm not sure. Go ahead.
let's see, can we measure the capacity of a person to be loved and to love?
Can we measure it?
Yep.
Oh, that's a tough question. Love is a very important virtue, I think, in all the work that we do. And I think it's something that we underestimate as professionals. You probably have more of a sense of it coming from a faith perspective, where love is very central to Christianity. But I think most psychiatrists are not that comfortable using the word.
I mean, I think in my own experience, I have been aware of family situations where it was some people were really able to develop love from a very loving family, and other people weren't. And sometimes I even think the institution of the church is there to sort of make up for the loss that the latter experiences, so that they can say, well, so my family couldn't love me, but I could go to church and the priest loved me. But anyway, that awareness, I'm glad to think that children are learning more about emotional awareness, but I'm wondering about the positive emotion of love. We seem to focus on a lot of the negative emotions, fear and anxiety and hurt and so on.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies was a spinoff of the Bruce Almighty series. Evan Baxter, the reporter, was a congressman, and he was asked to build an ark. And the acronym for ARK was a random act of kindness. And I often believe that a random act of kindness is a way of us showing love to each other. Matter of fact, I believe love is actually kindness and compassion, if you will, combined, which is really rooted in our companionship model, which is how you show compassion toward persons and how do you show kindness toward persons by honoring their humanity and respecting dignity and autonomy. I'm so excited to see a clinical approach to looking at this clinical aspect of mental health, and Christianity is a great resource. And I know that like some who've expressed, man, $119, we can't afford to do that. But maybe we can find some funders that can maybe help us provide that book here at Pathways, and we can check it out to folks. I'll look into that. Maybe it can be part of our library and we can check it out to folks. The only hope is to get it back. But Dr. John, thank you so much for your time this morning. And how can folks get in touch with you if they have more questions?
They can just email me. I should have put it on the slide. It's jpeteet@partners.org. I'm happy to take questions, and I really appreciate all this interest and discussion.
Absolutely. Say that one more time, if you would, please, Dr. John,
It's
and Cody, I'll have
J.
to put it in the chat.
Oh yeah, I can maybe put it in the chat.
And instead of the physical book, what about Pathways to Promise members having online access, or for a lesser fee? Even $89 is a lot of money. So that is something, if you could, I realize that's totally up to the publisher, not up to Dr. John. So that's
yeah, you could try them. I'm sorry I gave you the wrong spelling there. I'm going to do it again.
Well, we most definitely can always talk with the publisher and see if we can get some kind of group discount if we have interest. So we can always inquire about that and see what we can look into that. Well, this is called Engage, Learn, and Network. We've had an opportunity to learn from Dr. John. We want to hear from you all what you are doing in your ministries or your work around mental health and ministry. And so if you would like to give a report of what you have going on, we most definitely would love to spend some time to hear from you in the last 20 minutes we have of our time together. I'm honored to be able to be part of this one because I haven't been able to be part of Engage, Learn, Network for a moment. So I'm so happy to be here with you all. I would say this much, that with Pathways, we are offering some companionship instructor trainings coming up. We have one in September the 24th and 25th. We also have one scheduled in October. And we're also working with the Association for Catholic Mental Health Ministers to do an adaptation of companionship with a Catholic emphasis, as well as working with a Jewish synagogue to make a collaboration from a Jewish emphasis. And so we're excited about companionship, the companionship movement. And to learn more about companionship, you can visit our website, either pathways2promise.org or the companionship movement.org to learn more about companionship. So we've been working feverishly in making those conversions to companionship to fit those audiences. And we've been doing assessments also for congregations to assess their need for mental health ministry. And then we are so excited that the Kitchener Foundation has funded us to do some work with BIPOC being Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC congregations, to help them through an assessment process and companionship to serve their ministries also. So see how I did that? Brag on yourself. What have you been doing this summer, heading into the fall, that you'd like to share with this overall group? So we want to invite you right now to do that. Dr. John, you are free to stay around or you're free to leave. The choice is yours. But thank you so much once again, sir, for joining us for our Engage, Learn, and Network time.
Thank you so much. It's awesome.
All right. So who wants to share what's going on? Robert, you said that I was going to be speaking on Bridges of Care in San Antonio at your event in 2 weeks. If you want to share more about that, people may want to come and learn about that.
Yeah, in fact, I could, people could email me if you want me to send an invitation to the Zoom event. It's a free Zoom training presentation on Tuesday, September 21st from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time. And Jermaine will be sharing, possibly with the co-presenter as well, about what the Bridges to Care program is about, how cohorts of congregations can be trained in becoming behavioral health competent, and how companionship's a part of that, trauma-informed care is a part of that, mental health first aid's a part of that, knowing your local resources is a part of that. There are a number of elements that go into that training. I think it's a great model. I know our Greater Chicagoland Trauma-Informed Congregations Network here in Chicago area is interested in Bridges to Care as well, because it includes being trauma-informed as part of what we're doing to train lay people and faith leaders in congregations. So that's very exciting. And we're also in the Greater Chicagoland area working with with a number of coalitions to develop a shared resource repository model where we can promote each other's trainings, we can access faith resources, we can share ideas, we can consult with each other. It's almost like there's too much information on faith and mental health, and we need some connections and some collaboration to talk in person and figure out where to start and how to assess our needs and just get the ball rolling rather than feel overwhelmed by all the resources out there on the internet and everything. So the whole notion of how to develop a resource repository that's relational and participatory and supports each other with in-person connections, not just PDF files on the internet or something. So it's a very exciting process. So Bridges to Care, we're very excited about. The resource repository, we're very excited about. And it seems like lately there's a lot of interest in public health approaches to mental health problems that include what are the social determinants of health? How does racism, sexism, biases of different kinds, poor education, poverty, all kinds of other issues that create stress in people's lives and trauma in people's lives. How can we help as faith communities address those social determinants of health as well, and besides the mental health treatment for specific mental health disorders? So a lot of our panel presentations lately have related to how to get a handle on the social determinants of health. So those are three things that come to mind right now.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that there's a need for repository resources, because 30 years ago, when we first started Pathways to Promise, we were one of the main sources of information for faith communities. And now we need repositories to track information of what's going on with mental health and faith. And that's wonderful. And I was just I'm always happy to hear from persons like Rosemary, where we planted a seed, Pathways to Promise planted a seed, and it's grown and blossomed into the work that we see happening around the country. Robert's speaking of sacred.org, which is a site that was developed with the city of San Antonio. Bill Neely is the acting ED of that program. And I'm looking at getting him to be a co-host with me as part of this talk to talk about sacred.org and how that got started in San Antonio. But if you click that link, what you will see is that there are over 6,097 resources that have been identified in the San Antonio area. And all one has to do is put their zip code in, and it will provide them a list of every resource from medicine to food to counseling in the San Antonio area. And so to be able to duplicate this effort across cities around the country would be an amazing feat. We know some cities have 211, often associated with United Way directory, where they tend to have resources outlined too. But every city doesn't have a 211 in place where they can get resources. So sacred.org is a great example of how resources have been put together all in one place and able to be searched out that way. We would love to hear from others who may want to share what you are doing in your community as it relates to mental health and ministry, or other announcements you may want to share. Doug, there's a podcast. I remember. You gonna talk about your podcast?
I do.
Yes.
I do. So thank you. My name is Doug, and I'm with the Kinchner Family Foundation. And we have a history of supporting mental health and mental illness initiatives and organizations around the country. And about half of them have some sort of faith component to them, but the other half do not. So we've had a long history with a number of groups. But one of the things that the members of the board of the foundation, specifically my wife, Janet, and her niece, Rachel, put together a podcast over the past year, and they just launched it last month. And I'll put the link to the website in the chat. It's the shoelacesandsunshine.com. And podcast is on that site, and you can find it on all of your podcast platforms that you normally listen to. But it's a great conversation between my wife and her niece, talking about mental health, mental illness. My wife with her diagnosis, and her niece Rachel is in college, so she is struggling with all sorts of things that are related to college life and all of the things that have been happening this past year with the pandemic. So it's just a great conversation between the two of them, and each week there are different subjects that they share. So if you get a chance, just to take a listen and see what you think, and pass it along, because it's something new that we're just kind of a grassroots operation with this, but it would be great if you could take a listen and share it if you think it's appropriate. So thank you.
Great, Doug. Thank you for sharing the Shoelace, the Shoelace podcast, shoelaceandsunshine.com. Great. What Pathways has become is, as Robert has said, a repository of different resources. And so just like Janet mentioned, maybe us serving as some kind of vehicle to get that book to our partners, I will most definitely be checking on that. And we will most definitely be promoting the podcast here. And another good piece of news is, many of you all are familiar with Susan Gregg Schroeder and Mental Health Ministries. We sent out a spotlight for this fall announcing Susan's retirement, and Mental Health Ministries is now a program of Pathways to Promise. So we are so excited about that. So Susan's work will continue, legacy will continue through Pathways of Promise. So we'll be maintaining the Facebook page, maintaining the website, also any consultations that come by way of mental health ministries. So we are really excited about that. So you will be learning more. And what we've discovered with mental health ministries is we put posts about conferences, we put posts out there about different other resources, and the most likes we get are from memes. So we put out a meme and we get 75 likes and hearts and stars. We put out a conference, we get 2. I don't know, but the formula is put a nice meme out there, people will respond and share it. So we're going to keep that formula. We're going to keep sharing memes on the Mental Health Ministries page, but also sharing conferences and resources also through that platform. So that's a little more news from Pathways. We're so excited about Mental Health Ministries joining the family in this official capacity, because Susan has walked with Pathways for over 20 years, 20 plus years already. So it's just a natural fit with us. Any other news that you want to share that you have going? We have technically 8 minutes left. And I always love giving back the gift of time. So if there's nothing else, I would gladly say, thank you for coming. But if not, I don't want to cut anybody short.
I see that Rosemary shared. I'm involved in 2 organizations, Southeast Faith-Based Mental Health Initiative, African Americans in Mental Health, and Minds Renew Wake Forest. These organizations receive grant funding for faith-based mental health. So thank you for sharing that, Ms. Rosemary.
Hey, yes, and I just wanted to mention that briefly. The Faith-Based Mental Health Initiative is here in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's comprised of all Black psychiatrists and psychologists.
Oh.
And every year we have an annual conference. And last year we had a conference with Shannon Royster. And then the year before that, we've had others with the Department of Human Health Services. We did not have one this year, but we're planning one for next year. We'll be using the grant money that we received from that. And our base is actually growing because we're now bringing on more agents, mental health agencies. We've got groups from Alabama, from Florida, from Georgia now. And thank God we're getting the grant funding for that. And then I was recommended by Dr. Stephen Gresovich, whom you guys know from mental health in the church, who wrote the book, with Minds Renewed. Columbia University with Teachers College received grant funding, I'm thinking from HHS, on faith-based mental health. And so with that group, we're doing a lot of collaboration. So one of the colleagues on there is actually a church member of mine, Dr. Kenneth Rogers, who is the psychiatrist, and he is the director for the Department of Mental Health for the state of South Carolina. So we've got some good allies in mental health. So I am not a counselor yet, but I'm moving toward that realm.
Well, you know, what's amazing is you have Dr. John, who is a counselor professional, and this bridge between the professional and the layperson is so very important, that we break down stigma, that we increase literacy. And so having the champions out there like yourself and others who are that bridge between the two are so very important. One of the things we did with Bridges to Care and Recovery in St. Louis is we created a community connector model where we connected faith communities and mental health providers. And the faith members served as warm handoffs between the church or the faith community and the provider. It's a wonderful model because now persons who typically would be afraid to maybe go see a professional, the connection between the faith community and the mental health provider is made already. So it makes the handoff much easier, a warmer handoff. So I'm really excited about our future and what we are doing to bridge mental health, faith, and culture. And that's what Pathways is here to do, to make that connection between faith, culture, and mental health, because we know that our culture and our faith informs what we believe about mental health. So I just want to thank everybody for taking time on a Wednesday morning to be part of such a conversation. And this is going to be part of our enduring material. So we will take this conversation. It will be available on YouTube and also on our website. And the cool thing about YouTube is it has closed captioning. So persons who may be deaf or hard of hearing can also still be part of this conversation.
I have
Anyone
a
else?
question.
Yeah, Rosemary.
I do have a quick question. I had a conversation with a young lady, Alexander Thompson, with the Cumberland Counseling Centers on providing counseling for churches. And I know some churches are hesitant to bring on or to have on site psychologists and psychiatrists or counselors because of the insurance and the liability issues. Is there any way that you can address that?
Yeah, there is a insurance provider called Brotherhood Insurance. Brotherhood Mutual provides a lot of insurance for faith communities, and they actually created a guide for faith communities about the liability. And so I'm going to put in the chat feed. It's with Brotherhood Mutual, and they have a document called the Deacon's Bench. And in the Deacon's Bench, they have a safety checklist for outreach activities. They have a list for adult care ministry. They have 4 steps to starting a mental health support group. They also have a article on implementing a mental health counseling program. So this link I just put in the chat feed is with an insurance provider and lays out all those kind of things in regards to liability. So it's a great resource. So it's brotherhoodmutual.com. And I actually intend on having them do a webinar for us also. So check out that link. It's a lot of great resources.
I know that tends to be a frequent topic of interest. When we did a conference a few years ago on how to do spiritual support groups for people with mental health challenges, one of the people talked about their experience with their church's lawyer in organizing some of the issues that needed to be addressed, and how they're making sure this is not considered treatment, it's support, and those kinds of things. So that's a great question, and the Brotherhood Mutual sounds like a great resource.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you know, there's another link I just put in the chat feed about Good Samaritan laws. And what exactly do they protect? Because typically, if you're given assistance and you're given assistance not from the form of a professional, but as a lay person, you are protected under Good Samaritan law. This one link here gives you some information around that. Each state has their own kind of legislation sometime around Good Samaritan. So this right here could be a good link to kind of look and see kind of what protection you may get from Good Samaritan laws, but there are limited protections. And the other key thing is that we live in a very litigious society. So no matter what, somebody can sue you. But once again, it's all about intentionality. What was the intent? That's why it's so important that when people are being trained to provide assistance, that they're clear that they don't diagnose, they don't prescribe, they don't treat. They are a in-between to get person's assistance from the professional. So that's so very important that people understand their role. So we do that with the Bridges to Care program and other initiatives here. I can't believe it. I feel like Car Talk. I don't know if you listen to Car Talk, Click and Clack, Tapper Brothers. I love Car Talk. And I feel like you gave a whole hour with us. You did it. You gave us a whole hour of your life, and we appreciate it. It is, my goodness, where you are, 11:30 almost, 11:29. We are so grateful for the time you spent with us. And we have another webinar that will be coming up in November. So we'll do this again in November, and we look forward to seeing you in November. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Very
Bye-bye.
useful meeting.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.